The China-US rivalry is a protracted, long-term war of attrition. Its final outcome cannot be determined by short-term gains or losses in isolated battles. However, it's crucial to assess the results of each round of confrontation, especially since this marks the first time since the end of the Cold War that a major power has dared to challenge the United States head-on. The significance of victory or defeat here carries historical weight. As of the latest round of negotiations, China has achieved a comprehensive victory both strategically and tactically, winning on both the substantive and symbolic fronts. In stark contrast, the United States has found itself firmly on the back foot. This is analogous to the Chinese People's Volunteer Army's defense of Shanghaling during the Korean War, a historic triumph that cannot be discounted simply because every single US soldier wasn't eliminated. From a strategic perspective, Trump's earlier attempt to force China into submission through maximum pressure has proven to be a delusion. His arbitrary imposition of tariffs on China was a profoundly short-sighted decision, compounded by the astonishingly rapid reversal just 40 days later. This erratic behavior has severely damaged America's national credibility. As a major power, while perfection isn't expected, at least some consistency in policy is essential. Even if an initial decision was misguided, a country should persevere for a reasonable period to gauge its impact before reversing course, perhaps waiting for signs like a decline in China's foreign trade data or internal dissent emerging online. The reality, however, tells a different story. In April, China's import and export data achieved the second highest growth rate in history. 40 days is merely the typical transit time for a trans-Pacific cargo shipment. Before inflicting any significant damage on China, the US reversed its tariffs in a move that undermined its stature as a global superpower. This sends a clear message worldwide. Without China's consent, even the United States must yield. In the realm of global hegemony, showing weakness is a fatal flaw. Once the credibility of hegemony is questioned, maintaining dominance becomes exponentially more difficult. Tactically, China's countermeasures have been masterfully coordinated both domestically and internationally, with unwavering consistency in its stance. This coherence indicates that China had meticulously anticipated every possible move by Trump and developed comprehensive contingency plans. As a result, China responded swiftly, maintaining a steadfast position of ready to fight if provoked, open to dialogue if sincere, while demanding that the US cease its threats and engage in dialogue based on equality, respect, and mutual benefit. The US, on the other hand, has been disorganized, reacting impulsively without a clear strategy. Its policy flip-flops reveal a lack of a well-thought-out plan, indicative of internal divisions and fragility. As for the matter of substance and prestige, we will explore these aspects further. The US has managed to avoid even greater losses this time. Continuing the standoff would have undoubtedly exacerbated domestic economic and social crises, ultimately forcing a more humiliating retreat. By conceding now, it limited the damage. As the world's dominant power, most countries except for a few like China and Russia dare not criticize the US for this compromise, fearing retaliation as the US tries to reassert its authority. Even if one were to argue that the US gained some minor advantages, it's essential to distinguish between strategic and tactical outcomes. A prime example is the Cuban Missile Crisis. While the Soviet Union achieved certain objectives and could claim tactical gains, its ultimate retreat allowed the US to declare a strategic victory. The Soviet Union's subsequent claim of shifting the balance of power in the Cold War exemplified a tactical win masking a strategic loss. Similarly, both the Soviet Union during the Cuban Missile Crisis and the US in this tariff battle exhibited opportunism in offense and defeatism in retreat. Does the recent negotiation mark the end of the China-US trade war? Will there be future reversals? Is a 10% tariff hike Trump's true objective? In truth, the US miscalculated the situation and was forced to retreat. This is just the beginning of the China-US rivalry, which will far surpass the 2018 trade conflict in duration, intensity, and scope. The recent joint statement is brief and cautiously worded, underscoring that the real battle has only just commenced. Unlike the 2018 conflict, which primarily focused on tariffs and trade, the 2025 showdown encompasses a much broader spectrum of issues, with tariffs merely a single point of contention. Even on the tariff front, This is merely a temporary lull. Just a day before the China-US talks, Trump posted that an 80% tariff on China might be appropriate, contingent on Treasury Secretary Bessent. Clearly, 10% is not his final goal. Trump will likely renege on the joint statement and resort to tariffs again, as he has few effective tools left to pressure China, aside from potential security threats. However, the US military capabilities and global influence have significantly waned. Conflicts such as the Russia-Ukraine war, the Israel-Palestine conflict, and confrontations with the Houthi forces have stretched US military mobility thin. Additionally, the effectiveness of color revolutions has been greatly diminished. With fewer viable options at its disposal, the US will likely continue brandishing the tariff weapon. Thus, the trade war is bound to persist and experience frequent reversals. A critical detail in the China-US joint statement warrants attention. The section on establishing a mechanism for continued negotiations shifted from China-US-led negotiators before the Swiss talks to simply Chinese representatives and US representatives. The distinction between led and representative is significant. Moreover, the US delegation consists of 2 officials, Treasury Secretary Bessent and Trade Representative Greer. Having 2 leads often leads to disagreements and bureaucratic gridlock, much like the public feud between then Treasury Secretary Mnuchin and Peter Navarro during the 2018 trade war. Their bitter argument in China made global headlines. Compared to Navarro and other hardliners who were highly skeptical of trade negotiations, Bessent and Greer are more adept at diplomacy than provocation. This suggests that the rational faction within Trump's team currently has the upper hand, though this balance remains fragile. Trump wields ultimate control, and his decisions often hinge on his latest interactions. It wouldn't be surprising if a meeting with Navarro prompts him to reignite tariff threats, whether by signing new executive orders or simply announcing the agreement's cancellation on social media. Given Trump's recent pattern of aggressively raising and then suddenly eliminating tariffs while simultaneously focusing on stock market speculation, it's clear where his priorities lie. Just days before the Swiss talks, he publicly encouraged investors to buy stocks for the second time. For someone who can influence the markets and actively trades, trusting him to abandon tariff tactics seems naive. Some question whether China made concessions or incurred losses. Conspiracy theories suggest China secretly offered sweeter deals, such as purchasing more US Treasury bonds, relaxing export controls, or increasing US imports in exchange for the US backing down. At its core, this skepticism stems from the lingering belief in America's invincibility and the difficulty of accepting that the world's dominant power would yield to China. There's no need for elaborate rebuttals. Consider this: media giants like Bloomberg and Reuters, known for their insider sources, would have surely leaked any Chinese concessions. Furthermore, data on China's US Treasury bond holdings, rare earth exports, and US imports are publicly available. Doubters need only wait 2 months for the truth to debunk these rumors. Some skeptics simply lack confidence or struggle to keep pace with China's rise, while others hold biased positions. For the latter, a sarcastic "sure, the US won big" suffices. Even with reciprocal tariffs, the US stands to lose more due to the nature of bilateral trade. China exports mainly industrial products like electronics, smartphones, and computers, along with essential consumer goods such as clothing and footwear. Thanks to recent trends of US inflation and Chinese deflation, Chinese goods retain price competitiveness even with a 50% tariff. US importers' willingness to bear tariff costs to resume purchases proves America's dependence on Chinese products. Conversely, US exports primarily agricultural goods and fossil fuels face steep competition. Amid global economic slowdown, falling commodity prices, and a 40% tariff floor, American exports struggle to compete. China can easily source these commodities from other nations, making US products price prohibitive. Many wonder if China lifted its rare earth controls. The joint statement mentions suspending or cancelling non-tariff countermeasures against the US since April 2, 2025, but this refers only to new measures implemented after that date. China's rare earth control regime predates this timeline. Initial restrictions on gallium-related exports began in August 2023, evolving through regulations in 2024 and 2025. Coupled with anti-sanction policies and unreliable entity lists, China has established a comprehensive countermeasure framework. Now that rare earth export controls have been enshrined in law, China wields a powerful legal weapon, going far beyond relying solely on ad hoc regulatory measures. It's also crucial to note that just hours before the official China-US talks, on May 9th, China announced a special campaign to crack down on the smuggling of strategic minerals. Even if the new control measures implemented after April are suspended, this all-encompassing inspection of exports leaves ample room for nuanced enforcement. Regarding the recent news of certain enterprises exporting computers with rare earth-made casings, understandable concerns have arisen. However, the use of rare earths in computer casings is not unusual. It's often more of a marketing gimmick, similar to rebranding 300 for stainless steel as austenitic stainless steel. Moreover, considering the vast variety of rare earth elements and the minuscule amount, merely 2 or 3 grams used in a single computer, compared to the 400+ kilograms required for an F-35 fighter jet, it would cost over $2 billion to acquire enough computers, followed by complex processes of disassembly and extraction. Clearly, this is an impractical means of obtaining significant quantities of rare earths. We should have full confidence in the government. The ongoing crackdown on strategic mineral smuggling is serious business. Since the second half of last year, authorities have been exercising extraterritorial jurisdiction to trace final export destinations, primarily targeting audacious domestic exporters, and this time, a thorough rectification is inevitable. So, what should China do next? As repeatedly emphasized by official statements, China must listen to what the US says and watch what it does. Trump has a notorious reputation for going back on his word. The current agreement is merely a preliminary intention, with numerous details yet to be negotiated. Reversals are almost certain. China should not slacken due to this temporary lull, but instead continue to advance at its own pace, refusing to be derailed by the US's capricious actions. China's strategy can be divided into 2 aspects: domestic and international. Domestically, China should deepen reform, formulate the 15th Five-Year Plan in line with current developments, boost consumer spending, and stimulate economic growth. In other words, all ongoing initiatives should proceed as planned, regardless of the temporary easing of external pressure. As a major power, China has always remained self-determined in its development path. Internationally, there is much to be done. Trump's erratic tariff policies have inflicted severe damage on the global economy, and the consequences won't vanish just because he rolled back some tariffs. In fact, his repeated, arbitrary actions of suddenly imposing and then cancelling tariffs have exacerbated global anxiety about US policy instability. Countries around the world will surely use this respite to accelerate adjustments, preparing for potential future shocks. Any nation that lets its guard down will pay a heavy price. For China, 3 key tasks lie ahead. First, reshape the global trade landscape. This involves redirecting imports from the US to other countries, supporting Chinese enterprises' overseas expansion, reducing service imports from the US, narrowing the service trade deficit, and decreasing direct exports to the US to reduce dependence on the American market. In this process, US interests will be significantly eroded, while China's allies will benefit, helping China gain access to more international markets. For example, imports of US agricultural products are rapidly shifting to South America. In April, 40 Brazilian soybean carriers arrived at Jushan port, a 48% year-on-year increase. Argentina is also ramping up exports. On the 7th, a Chinese trade delegation visited Argentina, and according to Argentina's Clarín newspaper, the 2 sides signed a letter of intent to purchase approximately $900 million worth of soybeans, corn, and vegetable oil. Before January this year, Argentina had never exported soybeans to China, and its corn exports were negligible. Second, accelerate regionalism. Strengthen regional cooperation to fend off external interference, especially in East and Southeast Asia. Since April, efforts in regional affairs have significantly intensified. For the first time, regional cooperation has expanded from economic and trade areas to security fields. China has established 2-2 and even 3-3 dialogue mechanisms with several Southeast Asian countries, demonstrating a strong focus on regional security. Meanwhile, regional financial and monetary cooperation is accelerating. On April 29th, Chinese leaders visited the new Development Bank of BRICS countries in Shanghai. On May 4th, the ASEAN +3 finance ministers and central bank governors meeting was held in Milan, Italy, announcing the revival of the Chiang Mai initiative, which had been dormant for over a decade, and aiming to transform it into a fully fledged regional financial mechanism, effectively establishing a mini IMF in East and Southeast Asia, free from US influence. In tandem with these efforts, China has established its first overseas gold delivery center in the Gulf region. While the internationalization of the renminbi-RMB continues at a measured pace, the pace of RMB-denominated transactions and currency swap agreements is accelerating significantly. The third crucial task is to withstand US pressure and expedite global strategic positioning and international order reforms. It's essential to make the world recognize that a new era of change has truly dawned. China's commitment to its words and actions will undoubtedly manifest in numerous forthcoming initiatives. So, how will the world react to the latest round of China-US negotiations? For countries globally, China's victory is undeniably invigorating. It shatters the myth of the US being an unassailable superpower. Among these nations, Japan warrants special attention. During this round of US-led confrontations, Japan has adopted a strategy of firmness veiled in diplomacy, refusing to yield easily. Prime Minister Ishiboshi Kishida opposes hasty concessions in negotiations, emphasizing the need for a more strategic approach. Moreover, despite initial denials from the Japanese government, it was later revealed that Japanese institutions had, in fact, sold US Treasury bonds. On May 2nd, Japanese Finance Minister Kato Katsunobu stated during an appearance on Tokyo television that Japan's holdings of US Treasuries could serve as a bargaining chip in trade negotiations with the US, though the decision to deploy it remained open-ended. The Financial Times described this as a rare show of teeth, highlighting the growing confidence among Japanese elites in dealing with the US. Where does Japan's newfound confidence stem from? A significant part of it likely comes from its understanding of China. Japan knows that China will not back down easily. As long as China remains steadfast, Japan can afford to adopt a wait-and-see approach, leveraging the situation to secure more favorable terms. In contrast, European countries, along with nations like India, Canada, and Mexico traditionally more aligned with the US, find themselves in an awkward position. The US's abrupt about-face seems almost surreal. In this new dynamic, it appears as though the US might target its allies next. While the tariff war poses a relatively smaller threat to EU countries compared to the COVID-19 pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Europe has endured 5 challenging years and is ill-prepared for another round of trade disputes. Additionally, EU member states vary widely in their trade dependence on the US, with Germany being particularly reliant on exports to America. It remains to be seen how Europe will navigate this landscape. However, given Europe's current closer ties with the US Democratic Party, Sino-European cooperation is likely to strengthen. The world operates on the principle of realpolitik. Take the India-Pakistan air conflict as an example. Pakistan managed to shoot down India's state-of-the-art Rafale fighter jets without suffering any losses and destroyed India's S-400 air defense systems with hypersonic missiles. These incontrovertible victories not only deterred India but also demonstrated Pakistan's military prowess to the world, effectively averting an immediate war threat. Currently, the world's perception of China, especially regarding the relative strength between China and the US, is misguided or at least inaccurate. There is an overestimation of US capabilities and a significant underestimation of China's might. In the coming days, the world will likely be stunned by China's continued achievements, and we should expect nothing less.